Hello, fellow Mystery Files. Today I begin my ranking of all 32 Roderick Alleyn novels written by Ngaio Marsh. This video covers the bottom third or so of her works from numbers I've ranked numbers 32 through 22. And this was a very difficult set of novels to rank, in my opinion. Other than a handful of novels generally perceived to be top tier, there really is no consensus on a ranking of the Allen novels, where I see lists that are widely different from each other. Generally speaking, I don't find much variance in the quality of Marsh's novels as well. The majority are very good. Now, compared to Agatha Christie, I do think Christie is the superior author, but I find Marsh much more consistent than Christie. The bottom Roderick Alleyn novels I find to be much better than the bottom Christie novels. And fair warning, there may be spoilers ahead, but I will try to keep them to a minimum. All right, let's get into it. And as always, I will start at the bottom with number 32. And even this one that I've ranked last place, I have some positive things to say about it, and that is Vintage Murder. And this book contains three things Niall Marsh does very well. It has a New Zealand setting, involves the theater, and has an unusual murder method. The problem I have with this book is that she does all three of these things in Vintage Murder just a little too well. This book slogs from beginning to end. It begins with Alan on a train ride with the theater company, and we get lengthy descriptions of the characters and the landscape. We then have an in depth look into how the theater company operates, and none of this is particularly interesting. We do eventually get to the murder, and it is a fascinating one. March's murders are typically very unique and creative, and she goes to great lengths to make them credible, which I appreciate. Alfred Meyer has created this contraption for his wife's birthday where a large bottle of champagne falls from the ceiling and down into a basket. However, the trick goes wrong and the bottle slams down on Meyer's head, killing him. And we get a very graphic description of what his head looks like after the fact, which I also appreciate because that puts these books squarely out of the cozy category. And I sometimes see them discussed as such, and I strongly disagree with that sentiment, so I do appreciate the gruesomeness of this crime. The problem I have with this is that we get such intricate details into how this contraption works, and it's all so boring. It's not really necessary to figure out either. All we need to know is that someone rearranged the weights. We also have a long series of interviews with the suspects that I didn't find any of the characters interesting either, not even Carolyn Dakers, whom Alan falls smitten with. There's some things to praise about Vintage Murder, but overall, I find this book a complete slog, so I placed it last at number 32. At number 31, I have a novel that is mostly thriller plot, and that is Last Ditch. And unlike Agatha Christie, I do find that Niall Marsh is a competent thriller writer, and I don't really have any issues with that here. Alan often finds himself caught up in international intrigue as he is a Scotland Yard inspector, so that's only natural. And I find Marsh's thrillers much more grounded in reality. In Last Ditch, we have Alan's son Ricky in a major role. This is one of two novels where he plays a major part, and it's largely fine, but I do wish there was more of a focus on the mystery plot and on Alan in general. Ricky is really the main character for most of the action, which involves drug smuggling in the Channel Islands. There's really no twist or intrigue to anything in this book. This is one of the later Alan novels, and while Marcia's skills never really declined in her late career, I do think this one is simply not her best. We do know it had to be rewritten a few times and was heavily edited, and it does feel like that was the case, so I have to put it just above last place here at number 31. At number 30, I placed a book that I'm a little surprised is this low, but it does have a lot of issues, and that is the very first Roderick Alleyn novel, A Man Lay Dead. Now, Niall Marsh would go on to be very critical of her first novel. She called it contrived and embarrassing, and I agree with this to an extent, but I don't think it's as nearly as bad as she claims it was. The main character in this book, however, is Nigel Bathgate, who meets Alan for the first time, and they become fast friends. I always enjoyed Bathgate as a character, and I think it's a shame Niall Marsh cut him after a dozen or so appearances. But the fact that Nigel is the main character doesn't really harm the novel. It's all very cliche with a house party, playing a parlor game, and this is a very common trope in the 1920s and 30s. All the characters are friends, but there's a tension between them, and this is nothing special. I think Nigel is this novel's saving grace. He's very humorous, and I love when he confesses to Alan for no reason. I think where this novel goes off the rails, literally, is the ending where we learn our killer slid down the banister while wielding a sword, stabbed the victim in such a way that he fell and hit his head on a gong, and all of this is ridiculous. And then we have more ridiculousness with all this like Russian and communist espionage subplot that feels really out of place. For all these reasons, I put A Man Lay Dead here at number 30. Now, for number 29, I have a novel I do see sometimes toward the top of Roderick Allen rankings, and this may be a controversial pick because I do know it is very popular, but I disagree, and that is Death at the Bar. And for me, this book is a constant slog, but I recognize this plot is significantly better than any novel I've previously talked about. I can't quite put my finger on why I don't like this book very much. I think the characters are strong. I think the seaside community is well evoked. I think the plot mechanics function properly and in a very interesting way. My best guess is simply in the writing style, where it just doesn't hold my attention and slogs quite a bit for me. We also have some talk about communism, which is a trope I find very cliche in mystery novels, and I just prefer would not be included. Like I said, the plot mechanics are very good. Our victim is pierced with a dart and then suddenly dies from cyanide poisoning, and much of the investigation delves into how the poison could have been administered. And this is all very clever and well plotted. There's a lot of obfuscation involving the iodine bottles and the brandy and the rat poisoning. But for me, I found the solution pretty predictable. It's indicated not so subtly very early on. This is also the third time in the first of her eight Allen novels where Ngaio Marsh uses the same twist, where the person who physically killed the victim but then appears to have been set up by a third party is actually the guilty party. It works so much better the first two times she did it, and by the time this book comes along, you can kind of see it in the making. I also think Marsh misses an opportunity to create drama. Late in the novel, Inspector Fox is accidentally poisoned instead of Alan, and Alan is angered by this, but it just doesn't come off that way. And it is actually done much better in the previous novel, Death in a White Tie, where one of Alan's friends is also murdered, and he just feels so much more angry and righteous in that one than he does here with Fox. And Fox recovers quite quickly, which eliminates a lot of the suspense for me. I think Death at the Bar has a lot going for it, but I just can't get into this novel, so I have to place it here at number 29. At number 28, I place a novel that I think actually might be too high, and that is When in Rome. And this is another novel that has a murder and is a traditional murder mystery, but is largely focused on international drug smuggling, which I don't necessarily mind since Alan is with Scotland Yard. But we've seen this plot in a few Alan novels before, and I just think it's more interesting in those other novels. I don't have any real flaws with this book, but I also don't have much to recommend it. This is another novel as well where Marsh really captures the setting well, but she does it a little too well, where she goes into painstaking detail a lot. And this is a pretty common error for her, I think. It's too much for me that it comes across as a travelogue at times. And this low rating may come as a surprise to some people because this book is generally considered her best by her agents, and this is late in the canon. This is not an earlier novel where she has a lot less works out there to compare it to. And we know Marsh visited Rome in 1968 and witnessed the student protests that she features in this book. She also did extensive research into Italian police procedure to make the book more accurate, which I appreciate, but it does come across as heavily researched at the sake of entertainment. So I had to place When in Rome here near the bottom at number 28. At number 27, I have a novel I think very similarly of, and that is Tied Up in Tinsel. Like When in Rome, I don't have any major flaws with this book, but I also don't have much to recommend it either. This is a traditional country house slash Christmas mystery, which we don't get a lot of from Ngaio Marsh. And interestingly, this one focuses a lot on the servants instead of the guests, and all the servants here are reformed criminals. And I don't really like the way this is handled. I think it gives a bad message where all of these men are being rehabilitated with the message that rehabilitation is superior to imprisonment, but the servants are the criminals in this book, and I just think that leaves a bad taste in my mouth. I don't like the impression that it gives, but I do find the murder to be pretty unique where the body is tied to a Christmas tree, but that's not really enough to elevate it up the list any higher, since so many of Marsh's novels also have unique aspects to them to the murder plot, and they're done much better in those books. So I placed Tied Up in Tinsel here at number 27. At number 26, I have a novel that I will admit I had no idea what to do with. I think the case can be made for this novel being higher on the list or even lower on the list. But at number 26, I have Black as He's Painted. And this novel was tough to judge because it doesn't really age well. It is set in the early 1970s, and there's a lot of uncomfortable talk about race. The murder victim is Boomer, Alan's old friend who is the president of his native African country of Nagumbwana. And while the overall message is one of hope and positivity, I think the way Marsh writes certain scenes is questionable. Nagumbwana, in particular, is not depicted in the best way, where it basically comes across as a corrupt African country. There is also a lot of uncomfortable moments regarding Agatha Troy, where she's obsessed with wanting to paint Boomer's head because of how well shaped it is. And I think this could come across as racist, but I will give Marsh the benefit of the doubt because Troy makes these sort of comments about a lot of characters in across the many novels, including Alan himself. I do think this book covers important issues, especially ones that were hot topics in the 70s. The murderers are white conspirators who seek revenge on Boomer for crimes committed by other people from Ngumbwana. And Marsh in no way treats this as an acceptable thought to have. It is depicted as wrong, but I'm not entirely sure this novel is the proper outlet for this message. It's very similar to how I feel about murderers who are mentally ill. I just don't think it is appropriate for a traditional mystery novel. And for those reasons, I have Black as He's Painted here at number 26. At number 25, I placed the novel that for a long time was my least favorite Roderick Allen novel, but it recently jumped up the list quite a bit when I completed my last reread of the series, and that is Color Scheme. And this is another Marsh novel set in New Zealand, and Marsh once again depicts the setting a little too well. We get so much detail about the landscape and the culture, and while this evokes the setting very well, it is a bit of a slog to read. The difference for me between Color Scheme and a book like Vintage Murder is that all of this knowledge of the New Zealand landscape is relevant to the murder plot of the book. Our victim, Maurice Questing, dies in a very brutal manner. This is one of my favorite murder methods in any mystery novel. He's essentially lured into a pool of boiling mud, and this is so gruesome that I love it. There's no other mystery novel quite like this one. Marsh plays a lot of tricks on us here. This book is set during World War II, and we get a unique perspective on the war from New Zealand. Typically, World War II stories are set in Europe or North America, so this is a bit different. For most of the novel, we are led to believe that Questing is an enemy agent, and the reveal that he is actually an ally is shocking because he acts like an enemy for most of the novel. I have a newfound appreciation for this book's mechanics, but I still have some issues with them. The twist that Questing is colorblind is not handled well, or at least doesn't age well. There is a stigma attached to this that in the book that I don't quite understand in this day and age, and I don't like how his disability is what leads to his murder. I don't think it's depicted properly either, where Questing does things like mix up traffic signals, and he can't even see flowers if there are certain colors. I also don't care for what Marsh does with Alan in this book. He's undercover the entire novel, and the reader is not told this. Now, any reader familiar with Alan can easily pick him out, while a new reader is cheated out of the star detective. I also think the reveal falls flat, so with all of these errors, I have to place Color Scheme here at the relatively low number 25. Starting from this point forward, I'm now into the Roderick Allen books that I would call quote unquote good. I still think these next few have some serious flaws, but are otherwise good reads. The first of these is at number 24, and that is Death and Ecstasy. And I was a little surprised that I have this book this low. I thought it would be higher on the list. I love the characters in this book. They are all members of the Church of the Sacred Flame, and which is very clearly a scam church led by the obviously fraudulent Father Garnett. And this Church of the Sacred Flame is based on a real life scam church that Marsh's father helped bring down in New Zealand, and you can really sense that she knows her stuff in this book. Nigel Bathgate plays a very large role in this book, and I appreciate his natural curiosity with this strange church. I always loved his sort of bromance he has with Alan, and it's a shame we don't get more of this in future novels. I think the murder mechanics are very clever. Kara Quane is an initiate into the church, and she is killed after drinking from the chalice that several other people have also drinking out of. My one critique of the murder mechanics is that this point is driven into us over and over again. Alan talks about this and goes over the details so many times, it feels a little bit like padding. We don't need to review it as many times as this book does. Another common issue I have with some of Ngaio Marsh's books is the way she introduces physical evidence. Because Alan is a professional detective, he needs the physical evidence to make an arrest. This isn't a situation where the main character is someone like Hercule Poirot or Jessica Fletcher, who can come to the conclusion without needing that physical evidence. And because March is much more interested in the characters and the psychology and the setting of her novels, what she often does is just throw in a physical clue at the very end, and she doesn't always do a great job of making it subtle or fit in smoothly. And she has to do this because of Alan's career, and it doesn't hurt the books too much because she does do such a great job with all the other elements. But it is a bit of a knock here where the drug making paraphernalia is just thrown in our face really quickly at the end, and it makes the solution a little more obvious. So I place Death and Ecstasy here at number 24. Now, for number 23, I have a novel that I generally see considered on the lower end of the spectrum, and I think there is an argument for it to be even lower on the list. But here I have Deadwater. And I really enjoy the concept of this one, where Alan aids his former teacher, Miss Emily Pride, who has inherited a town somehow, and this town had an allegedly miraculous healing spring. And I think the dynamics of this situation are why I have this book this high on the list. I love the interactions between Miss Pride and the locals. Miss Pride finds the spring exploitive, and the local residents resent her for trying to shut it down. The spring is the center of life in town, and much of the town's economy comes from tourists wishing to visit the spring. Deadwater has a very good Allen content. I haven't really talked too much about him, but one of the things I appreciate about his character is how emotional he is. He loves certain people very dearly, like his wife Agatha Troy and his friends like Fox and Bathgate, and he loves Miss Pride. And this is quite a contrast to many literary detectives of the Golden Age who are driven strictly by their sense of justice and are, for the most part, emotionally detached from their cases. And Allen is the complete opposite of that. So many of his cases have personal stakes for him, and this book is one of the best examples of that. Now, the mystery itself isn't the best, which is why I think it could be lower on the list. Miss Pride is attacked, but somebody else is found dead in the spring, and there's no real shocker or twist here. It's just a baseline mystery, so I placed it here at number 23. And now for number 22, which is the final book I'll cover in this video, I have yet another novel that I find to be very good, but is hampered by Marsh once again overdoing the descriptions, and that is Off with His Head, also called Death of a Fool. And I find certain aspects of this novel to be fantastic. The book is set in the village of Mardian, and we are treated to a lot of the local folklore, and I personally find this very interesting, but it does read a little textbooky at times. But Ngaio Marsh still paints an absolutely vivid picture of life and the history of the small village of Mardian. She crafted such a fantastic, gruesome mystery in this book that heavily involves the local folklore, specifically the mumming ritual, and the solution to William Anderson's beheading lies within the secrets of this ancient tradition. And this is fantastic murder that keeps this novel very high on this list. I find a lot of the characters to be a lot of fun as well. In particular, Anna Bunz is a fantastic character. She's a German historian who is so desperate to learn the secrets of the Mardian mumming ritual. I find William Anderson's sons to be really bland and lackluster, which is a shame because they are very important characters to the solution. The first letter of their name spell out the word dance, and even with this naming theme, it is very difficult to keep them all straight. I also find this book bounces around a lot between the different groups of people in town, so the transitions are a bit whiplashy at times, but this murder plot is so expertly crafted and delivered that I wish I could put it higher on the list than here at number 22. And that's it for this video. Next week, I will resume my ranking of the Roderick Alleyn novels with the numbers 21 through 11. And these books start the next tier of novels that I would now say all of these books are of very good quality. Some still have a few issues, but those are minor compared to these bottom ranked titles. If you want to keep up to date with the channel, make sure you subscribe, like this video, and leave a comment in the section below. Until next time, Mystery Files.